everybody. Paul Taubman here with 9.connects. Thank you very much for joining me here today. So our webinar topic is going to be on symbol creation. So let's get on to it here. Very, very quickly here. Who are we? We're 9.connects. We are a PCB-centric organization that provides coachings and trainings and also services primarily around Altium Designer. So for coachings, those are custom coachings that we can help you with. So if there's specific things you need to do in Altium, we're there to help you with it. For our trainings, we were the recent North American exclusive Altium trainers. We've actually parted ways with Altium, and now we're coming up with our own material. We have all of our equipment. We're capable of doing this on our own. And just to let you know, we've just finished our boot camp, so we have now deployed it. So if we're going to keep in military terms, I figured I'd throw that out there. So I went to it last week. It was really drinking from the firing hose. It was quite a boot camp, nevertheless. And we will be doing one in Columbus, Ohio, and in Boston, Massachusetts here in May. Also for special ops, we're going to be doing our first deployment of that on May 18th in San Diego, California. You're certainly invited to attend that. If you're here, please do contact us for more information. That is very specific for those people who've already done a few boards in Altium Designer and want to get a better handle on the PCB editor and the libraries as well that go with it. And then lastly, for the PCB fundamentals in Dallas, Texas, if you're someone who's kind of been a part of the process but don't feel like you have a total grip or understanding on the process itself, we put together this PCB fundamentals. It is very much based upon design for manufacturing, design for test techniques that you ought to know so that your projects can go as smooth as possible. One last thing I'm going to mention before we get on to the good stuff over here is I'm going to just bring up our website here for 9.connects. Here at 9.connects, obviously we have a website to show that we have existence out there, but we've really put a lot of our heart and soul into it as well. If you're looking for some educational information here, it's our webinar series. We've done quite a few of these as of late. If it's not something you can click on and it's immediately available, you can always do a request for it, and we're going to respond to that request very, very quickly. You can see we've covered a number of things over the last 2 years. But in addition, if you do want those things that are immediately on demand, go ahead and take a look at our video library on demand here. So there is a big overlap between the two. As for our webinars, we do systematically release them as time goes about. As a matter of fact, there is a series we did on design for manufacturing last year. We did about the PCB. I think we also did it on the libraries, and I think we also did it on the schematics and the documentation as well. So if you're interested in those, please do take a look. We've made those now available out there, and we're always trying to release it in a timely fashion so you can take a look. Even for our design services and for other things that we've got over here, if you take a look at what we put here, it's not just a bunch of pretty pictures, and yes, we can do this, and a big list, a grocery list of what we can do. We really want to show you what our philosophies are. What are we doing? Why do we recommend the things that we recommend? So do take a look at that. We do put some time and energy into write-ups over here. And then very quickly, and I'll go off here, just to realize that we do have a little bit of fun here at 9.connects. We created something called a back 9. So this is our eclectic collection of stuff here, things that some of us have written over time or things that we've gotten from Altium that they no longer make available. So take a look at it here as well. So we hope that you enjoy the site, and let's get on to the good stuff that you are really here for, and that is for symbol creation. So hopefully by the time we're done with this webinar today, those who are somewhat new to Altium, you'll get a good feel for how the tool works. And for those who've been using Altium for a long time, maybe you'll pick up a nugget or two that you'll find very useful. Now, I've been doing this for a little bit more than 9 years, and actually the thing I'm going to show you today just dawned on me in the last month or two that we could actually do this, so that we could add some efficiency into making some parts. Now, for you newbies out there, very, very quickly, if you're going to create a library, you've always got to start off with File, New, Library. And there's a bunch of libraries they provide to you here. And the point is that we're going to talk about the schematic library. We won't have much time to talk about PCB today. We'll maybe talk about it in a webinar in the near future. The point I want to bring up, however, is that there are a lot of different libraries in Altium here. And no matter what libraries you really use, at the end of the day, in the PCB domain, you always have to have a symbol and you always have to have a footprint. So it doesn't matter what other type of libraries you're going to try to use. They're really more methodologies, but you'll always need that symbol and you'll always need that footprint. So you'll always need to know how to use these two libraries. So there's the symbol library. What I've set up over here is a project. For those people who've attended prior webinars, you may have seen this library before. We do make it available upon request. It is basically what we call our DFM, Design for Manufacturing library, so we're trying to put best practices into it. Now, we did set this up as a project so that we have a schematic library here, and we also have our PCB library, and we also place them down on the schematic and on the PCB so you can see the results of what goes on in the library. Because when you're working in the library, you see the component, but when you're working in the project, you see the project or how the components interact with those components as well. So that's what we've got here. Do you need to set it up this way? No, you just need to get that schematic library going and you'll have a good start. Now, the big thing I find with libraries is that you need to have consistency, because consistency gives you your feel and look of your libraries. And really the biggest problem what I find with consistency more often than not are blanks, and not just really following what you put over here and filling in the blanks. We'll talk about this, which I call intelligent data, but also making sure that the information that you have over here as well, especially for your pins, looks the same. Like, for example, you're not changing different fonts, you're not doing different font sizes, and so on and so forth. And as a matter of fact, really when it comes to a symbol, there's really three things you need. You need to have a graphical representation of the symbol itself. You got to have a footprint, all right, because there's obviously a physical representation of the component, and you need to have this intelligent information. And this intelligent information is there so that when you place down a part, by you simply placing down the part and having that intelligent information, you're going to get a bill of materials out of that. If you're finding yourself putting together a manual bill of materials, and I've said this many times before and it's worth repeating, if you're doing a manual bill of materials, you may as well put that time and energy into putting into a good library so that when people place down a component, you're going to have a bill of materials build automatically. All right. So that's some of the fundamentals here. One last thing for those people who are slightly new to Altium, I think it's a point of confusion. I want to bring it up. Let me bring up the libraries panel for a moment. Don't confuse the SCH library panel with the libraries panel. Okay, the libraries panel is what I'll call a global panel. It's available in pretty much all the editors, and as opposed to the SCH library panel, which is an extremely useful panel, but it's only available to you when you're in the SCH library. So, for example, if I click on my SCH doc over here, you'll see that the SCH library panel has disappeared because it's a context-sensitive panel. It has nothing to do with the schematic. So if I go back over here to the library, it brings it back up again. If you can't find this panel, by the way, take a look at SCH at the bottom right corner, and you'll find SCH library panel. As for the libraries panel, it's a placement panel. The only usefulness I've ever found for this particular libraries panel in the schematic libraries, it lets you look at other things. But you can't copy anything from it. I wish you could, because I think it'd be a very useful feature to do. So I can't drop it into the editing area, and I can't drop it to another panel. Many years ago when I worked at Altium, I had a conversation with a fellow by the name of Marty Huff, who used to work there as well, and I was begging him to have this ability to transfer between the panels, but the architecture of Altium won't allow that. So in essence, this libraries panel here, unless you're looking to see what you've done on other libraries, is of very little value. You can just close it and let it zip off to the side, or just close it all together. All right, now let's get into actually creating a part, and that's what we're going to do here for the next couple of minutes. So what are we going to do here? Well, I am going to add a part, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some information from an existing part, and that's, again, goes back to consistency. Copy and paste is a good thing as long as you're consistent with your copy and paste. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the filter that's available on the top left corner of the SCH library. I'm going to do a wildcard, which is an asterisk, and I'm going to type in op. And now it's going to bring up my two examples here. Now, I am actually going to create this one here today, the LM741C, but in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually delete it. There it is. I'm going to delete that part here, so I'm going to build it new and fresh. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to add a new part, and we'll build it back together. But before I do that, I'm going to double-click into this other op-amp so that I can take its naming. And the reason I want to do that, again, is for consistency purposes. So I'm going to cancel here, and now I'm going to hit the Add button. I can also go into Tools, New Component, and I'll get the same thing. All right, so there's the component. I'm going to do a Control-V to paste this in. The only thing I need to change with this one over here is just the name. So we're going to do a classic LM741, and we're not going to do the CAN. We're going to actually do the chip version, which is the CN, and it's from Texas Instruments. So there it is. I got my new part. Okay. Now, granted, I could go over here, copy this, and drop this in here, or I could even copy this component and paste it in, and I'd be done here really, really quick. But I want to show you the essence of putting together a part here. So we really are going to put most of this together by scratch. You'll also notice that the description is already up here, and you'll notice it's got some brackets around it, and I'll explain why it's doing that here in a few minutes. The other thing, and it's a little goofy, and I do want to fix this a little quickly, I'm going to select this. I'm going to do a VD, and the reason I do this is it shows me the entire editor. And I want to draw things here in the origin, but for some reason, after I set some stuff up in the preferences, which I'll show you, for some reason, they're pushing these things up here in the corner, so I need to bring them down just a little bit here, and that'll be fine. In Altium Designer, when you are creating, whether it's a symbol or even a footprint, you got to build it around the origin because it needs to know where to put the cursor in relative reference to where you're working. I'm going to hit another two hot buttons as VF, and by the way, VF and VD are just these little underlines that you see here. So the letter V is actually the view menu. So if I hit the V, it brings the menu to my cursor. And then if I use D, it'll show me the whole document that zoom me out. Or I can do fit all objects, and that's what you see here right now. So these are just the shortcuts based on the underlines that you see here. Okay? So I'm going to zoom this out over here. And as for the description, the reason why I see it is because under Tools, Document Options, yeah, I have this turned on that says always show comment and designator. Okay, so that's why I always see the comment and the designator, because I've turned this on. If I didn't turn this on, I would never see it, even if I had them visible. So if I double click here, even if I had this visible over here and the comment visible, I wouldn't see it. I actually have to go into Tools, Document Options in order to actually make them visible. All right. So that's what I've got over here. We'll see this a little bit more here in just a moment. Now, let me double click into this again and show you something that some of you may have caught on to this. Some of you may have not realized it. Normally when you open this up, this parameter area would be completely empty. Okay? And the symbol reference would probably have some stars in it, and it would be very, very generic, and you would have to fill in the blanks. So why is it that when I did new component, all of this stuff got filled in? Well, there's a feature in Altium which has been there pretty much since day one, and it only dawned on me recently that we can take advantage of that, and that's in the DXP top left corner, Preferences. And when we go into the Preferences, we go into the Schematic folder under Default Primitives. And under Default Primitives, every single primitive that Altium represents, because you can't create primitives and you can't really remove primitives, these are all the primitives that Altium has created for its schematic and its schematic library tools. They're listed over here. And you can set up the properties so that they can always be reused. And that's exactly what I did over here. So when I click on the part, I went in here and I set all this up. And I made sure that the fonts were the same and that the names, these are the names I always wanted to fill in. Now, more importantly, you'll notice that I have everything in these brackets and in capital letters. Now, that's not to prompt any type of scripting in Altium, but rather when I see these things in a list, that means I forgot to make a change to them. And I need to go in there and make a change to these values here. As I mentioned earlier on, one of the biggest problems to consistency is text boxes, and in particular when there's nothing in the text box. If there is, for example, if a text box is blank, what do we normally do with it? A, the fastest thing to do is ignore it, which means that no information ever gets into it, and that's a bad thing. Or B, we put in some gobbledygook in there because, quite frankly, we don't know what someone's looking for. So my idea behind this was that, yes, I'll create these names here, and by having consistent names, I will always have consistent columns. But more importantly, the formatting of my values is important as well. So if there's things I got to obtain from the librarian, I put a little statement in there. If I had a document that I had to refer to, I would put, hey, refer to document such and such for more information. If it's enumerated, I could say, for example, for Rojas, it's either yes or no, and this is the format I'd want it in. If we keep statuses as to where the part is progressing through our management systems, then we can also do that as well here. But I don't recommend you leaving any of these blank. You just want to make sure that the information that you want to see here is somewhat detailed, and that, again, people would go in there after this has been placed, and you can make those changes accordingly. And all I need to do is set this up here in the preferences and save it off. I've also done this for the pin as well. And actually what drove me to this idea was the fact that in Altium Designer, as far as I can tell, and if someone's got another idea for it, they can please tell me, but I did ask my colleague Chip about this last week, there is no what I'll call textual universal parameter or font in Altium. Now there are ones that's called for the buttons, like the sans serif. They've got that set up in the preferences under, I believe, system or data management. But in terms of like my textual information, like my parameters, there is no universal font that I can set in the preferences that say always use Arial Narrow 10, for example. So what I did was I said, fine, if I can't set that up, I can at least set up my primitives to always point to Arial Narrow 8-point font instead, and that's what I've done over here. I'm going to talk a lot more about these pin positions here in a couple of minutes. I've also created under parameters 2 parameters over here. You can call them whatever you want, but you'll see why I created these things in a couple of minutes as well. It's another option when these designator position or line name position and fonts aren't working to 100% of what I need to do to represent them. So that's what I set up here. Lastly is that we can set a little checkbox over here called permanent. And maybe you didn't realize this, but you may have noticed that when you place down something in Altium and then you hit the tab key to get into its properties, when you make those changes and place it and then bail out of the command by escaping out, and you use the command again, it retains the last pieces of information. Okay? And in some cases, that's extremely useful and helpful. In other cases, that can be pretty detrimental. So I do have to turn on the permanent to say, look, no matter what changes I make, if I hit the tab key, I want to retain the original information. And just to demonstrate this, I am going to turn off the permanent for a moment here. All right, and I'm going to press OK. Let's go into place, and I'm going to put a line down. All right, and I'm going to hit the tab key here. So this is, let's say, small, but I'm actually going to do a large line, and I'm going to make it red. Press it OK. So again, what I did was I started the command, I hit the tab key, made the changes, and now I'm drawing these down. Okay, and I click off. I'm done with it. I want to draw another one. So I'm going to hit the P key to bring up the place menu. I'm going to hit the L key to do the line again. Notice how it retained the last pieces of information. And that is because of the fact that I have this DXP preferences permanent turned off. Okay? So that's what it is. I'm going to do 2 Control-Cs to get rid of this. The last thing I'm going to do here very quickly is I'm going to just change those back here and then turn permanent back on. So let's go back into place. Line here. I'll start the line, draw it in here. We'll bring it back to 229 Altium Blue. And then I think we make the line, I think it's a small line at this point, and we'll be good. So I'll click that down. That should be memorized at this time. We'll delete this. And then we will go back into the DXP preferences and turn on the permanent, because we are going to do a lot of changes to the pins, and I don't want that information to be saved here at this point. I think one recommendation, especially if there's any Altium folks out there, I think a really useful feature would be to have a permanent capability for each one of these so that the users could pick and choose which ones they want permanent and which ones they don't. Okay, but that's why I turned on the permanent here. And those are all under DXP preferences. All right, so with that in mind, let's do some drawing. So I am going to hit the P key, and I'm going to do a line, and we're going to start our operational amplifier. Now, my grid right now is set at a grid of 5, and that's at the bottom left corner. So let me escape out, put my cursor over there. At the very bottom left corner, there's a grid of 5. And if I hit my G key, and I can hit my G key pretty much any time, even when I'm placing a component, I can switch between 5, 10, and 1. Now, a grid of 10 is important for the pins themselves, because Altium's libraries are all based off of a grid of 10. Now, at least the tip of the pin. Let me put down a pin here so you can see it. The pin, let's zoom it on in over here, has a hotspot. So there is an orientation to the pin, and the hotspot has to sit on a grid of 10. Now, does the rest of it have to sit on a grid of 10? The answer is absolutely no. You can do whatever you want to represent it. As a matter of fact, just to be kind of goofy about it, as far as Altium's concerned, let's click into this. Let's put a name on this, saying A, and calling this 1. All right. And then if I do a placement of another pin here, and I put this here, let's make this one B for the display name, and I put 2, and I save this off as is because it's already a part in here. Let's flip that around so it at least points the other way. As far as Altium's concerned, this is a part. The stuff that we put in the middle over here is for human readability. It's really the pin number and the pin name that's really important for Altium's net list, particularly the pin number. Because if we put a model to this, and we'll do this in a little bit, if I have a pad 1 and I have a pad 2, Altium's automatically going to assume pin 1 is associated pad 1, and that pin 2 is associated pin 2. As for the rest of this stuff, all just human readable. Okay? And that's why I just want to make mention of the fact that with the grid of 10, I want this hotspot to be on this grid of 10 over here, but the rest of the things I draw don't have to be on that grid. Okay? And we can move those around accordingly. All right, so just want to bring that here to your attention. Let's delete those over here, and let's continue to draw our things. And again, I want to do this over here on our center point. Now, as for putting things on the center versus in the top left corner, it depends on how you do it. If your company wants to do everything in the top left corner, you can. That's been the traditional way of most of these. Really what this crosshair is a reference for the cursor. So when you place down the part, it tells Altium, hey, this is where your reference point is of the component versus what your component is at this point or for this particular part. And all I would say is be consistent. If you're going to always put it in the center, be in the center. If you're always going to put it in the corner, put it in the corner. So that's just my rule of thumb over here. All right, let's do some drawing here. Let's go into place, line. I'm going to start my line over here as such, and we're just going to make a very simple triangle. Boom, there's my triangle at this point in time. Now I got to fill it some pin information because obviously that's the most important aspect of any type of symbol if I want to have a net list be created from us connecting these things up in the schematic. So I'm going to go into place, pin. And by the way, for those people new to Altium, I know there's other EDA tools that allow you to create parts in the schematic tool. You cannot do that in Altium. The pin primitive is only available in the schematic library tool. You can copy things from the schematic and put them into the library, but you can't create new components in the schematic editor. You've got to create them in the library. So here's my first part. All I'm going to do is going to go through a list here very quickly. I'm going to put down 5 pins, all right, and I'm just going to stack them over here on the side, and I'll move them in just a moment. So I'm going to hit my tab key over here. My first display name is classic VIN minus. My designator on this is going to be 2. And the electrical type, this is something I recommend that you do change. A lot of people skip over this part, but in Altium, when you compile, it runs an ERC, the electrical rule checker. And the electrical rule checker is enhanced by you providing information about the electrical type here. So I'd say it's better to get a bunch of warnings that you can write off as saying they're false positives rather than you not getting a warning that you really needed to see. Okay, that's the way I look at it. This is an input here. I'm not going to mess with the designator positions or the name positions at this time. I'm just going to simply place it down. Okay, let's get to the next one here. The number 3 is correct, so it auto increments it, which is a really nice feature. That's one thing I like about Altium. They put little things in there that try to kind of keep things moving as simple as possible. This is VN plus. We'll drop that in here. Let's hit the tab key again. We've got the next one that we're dropping down. This is going to be V out. So put OUT in there, and this is a pin 6. We got 2 more to go, so bear with me here. And then we're going to put in a V plus. Right, and the V plus here is pin 7, so I don't have to change that one. And I do have to change these other ones here. I'll change those here in just a moment. I'll show you another way to change them. I should have been a little more vigilant about that. And lastly, this is a pin 4, and this is going to be V minus, and there's one I'll have to delete after that because I double-clicked it down, but that's fine. So put this one down here. I don't need pin 8, so we will simply delete that one at this point by hitting the delete key. So as I mentioned, I told you guys to do this, and of course I forgot to finish up on the other ones. Not a problem. I can always double-click into each one of these to fix that. So for example, for this one, I can make this an output. But what I can also do, too, is I can use a feature called the Sch Inspector Panel. And the Inspector Panel is kind of a nice feature. And you, by the way, also find that in the bottom right corner where the Sch Library Panel is. You can also find the Inspector Panel as well. What's nice about this is that instead of having to double-click into something, I can just click on it, and it brings up all its properties. So I just got to go fishing through here to find those things. But more importantly, if I've got same things, like let's say 7 and 4 both need to be changed to power, I can click on one, hold down my shift key, click another one, so now I've got both of these selected. I could also draw a box around them as well. And then I can go in here and make that change. So in this particular instance over here, the electrical type is showing as input. I want to change this over here to power. And now these have been changed. And now the only other one I think I have to do is V out, but V out has been changed. It looks like all my pins are ready to go. So let me place them on here. Now, could I put these pins around here in real time? Certainly can do that, all right? But I find with discrete parts, they get a little, you're working with unusual shapes, and sometimes you can get really bogged down in some of the effort to put this all together, all right? So that's why I like putting the list out there, and I put these pins in accordingly. So just have to make sure my orientations are all outside, and that looks good here. Now, if I want to cosmetically change up a couple of these things, for example, V minus and V plus, I'd prefer to have them actually 90 degrees. Same thing with 4 and 7. V out is kind of interfering with the shape itself. I'd like to move that. And even 2 and 3 are kind of sitting on top of these input arrows. So what can I do to change those? Well, first and foremost, let's just look at the properties they give us. So if I double click into pin 2 over here, if I turn these off, okay, this is what the default is going to look like. All right. And if I have this, if I want to change these here, I have to hit the customize positions to make those changes. And what's nice is as I make these changes, I can see in real time what they're going to do. So if I want to move over the margin, pardon me, if I want to move over this name over here to a little bit to the left or the right, I can either put a plus or a minus in there, and you can see it moves it accordingly. All right, I'll leave this one at 0. For the margin on the designator over here, I want to push it out a little bit more, so I'm going to give it a 5. Actually, I think it's 7 that worked best. So I'm going to give that a 7 over here, and I'm going to press OK. So you play with it a little bit more, and it works out just fine. Same thing here with this one. We'll go back into this one. Now that we know the other one's 3, we'll move this one as a 3. We'll press OK. That's fine. As I mentioned earlier, we can use the inspector panel. So I'm going to click on 7 here, shift click, and hold down 4. And if I go into this here, I can see that the relative orientation's 0 degrees. It wants us to be 90. All right? And when I make a change here, notice it instantly happens here. So it's not going to ask you, do you want to make changes? When you make a change here, it makes it in real time. Same thing here with pin designator relative orientation, and those look good. Now, what about pin 6? The problem I got with pin 6 is this. If I double click into it, and I start moving my margins around for my name here. So if I start moving this over here and I make this a -8, it doesn't matter what I do here. It's only going to move it left and right. If it was horizontal, it would only move it up and down, okay? So what I want to do is I actually want to be able to move V out wherever I need it to be, and maybe I would want to push out 6 a little bit as well. So there's a trick that we can use here, and this is what I was showing you a little bit earlier on. Now the display name and the designator, I've got to have it. Okay, those are properties of Altium that are necessary, or for the pin within Altium, it's necessary for its net list. I'm going to turn those off. Okay, so they're still here, but I'm turning them off. But what I'm going to do over here is I'm actually going to put in pin name, which is V out, and a pin number over here, which is 6. Okay, and I'm going to turn this one on and turn this on, and I'm going to press OK. Okay, and again, I set these up so that they match here. The color's a little bit off, so it's something I'm going to have to fix. But nevertheless, if I click here, I can move this around as I see fit, which I couldn't do with my designator or my numbers for these other ones. Okay, so that's what I'm doing here is I'm cheating it a little bit by having a cosmetic parameter represent V out and 6 here. Now notice it's jumping around a bit because I'm on a grid of 10, but if I hit the G key and change it to 1, I can now move this around very easily to where I need it to go. Okay? And as I said before, it's really the pin that needs to be on a grid of 10, but this other stuff that I'm looking at is really for human readability purposes. It can be on whatever grid it needs to be on. I'm going to do a Control-S to save this at this point in time. You know what? I'm also going to add a model in here at this point because I have a model set up for this. I'm going to do an add footprint. Actually, before I do that, just want to mention to you here that there are 4 things that we can add in. We've got the footprint, which I'll add in here in just a moment. There is a PCB 3D. This is a legacy thing. I talked quite a bit about this in a prior webinar I did a couple of months ago, so take a look at that. But the short of it is this: do not use this, all right, unless you actually are using the legacy 3D stuff, and I don't recommend it. The new stuff is far, far better and easier to use. We don't attach the 3D body to the symbol anymore. We attach it to the footprint, and we've been doing that since 2008. Simulation models for SPICE. Some things do have simulation models for SPICE, some of them don't. If you're not doing SPICE, you don't have to put it on there. And same thing with IBIS models. If you're doing primarily for IC chips, that's where IBIS models are most useful. If you're going to use the signal integrity tool in Altium, then you probably want an IBIS model there. But for our purposes here, I'm just simply going to put a footprint in, and I'm going to browse the library. For our mask, I do notice there's a TI part, and it's this one I recently created. It's called the DIP, and it is actually a classic through-hole part. It's one I actually used back in the mid-90s, many years ago. So it's still there. Texas Instruments still makes it. It's a very viable part. You can buy it from DigiKey or Mauser. All right, I'm going to press OK. So now I've linked this up and I'm a happy camper. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about alternate views. And this is a point of confusion for a lot of people. And if you're new to this, you can get pretty spooked out by it because the way Altium kind of presents it over here. There's some buttons over here that if you don't know what you're hitting or what they're for, you can get pretty freaked out. So if you hit this plus button over here, boom, it just blew away my design. So what happened to it? Then everybody's in a panic. It's like, well, wait a minute, I see this. Did it just wipe out my design? What's going on over here? And I think Altium must have changed this so this changed back to the normal mode so people could see it. But really what I did here when I hit the plus sign is I created something called alternate one, okay, or an alternate mode. All right? And the idea behind alternate mode is a different representation of the same part. So this part over here is a classic op-amp, all right, and I did it in a discrete form, but I also want to do it in an IC form. I don't want to put it in another part, because if I put it in another part, it's going to be assigned another company part number, and if you're actually doing your own manufacturing, that will eventually result in 2 different bins of the same part in your inventory. And you really, really want to avoid that, because then you don't get the you don't really get the opportunity to take advantage of volume discount pricing. So, and I've seen this happen at some companies where the same resistors in 4 different bins, and it's really a hassle for them to try to recombine all that stuff in the paperwork. So they just have to let those 4 bins sit, and it's frustrating to them because they can't take opportunities to say, well, you know, we need 50,000 of these resistors rather than 5,000 resistor for this project and 15,000 for this project, and so on and so forth. So just be mindful of that. What it's not is it's not like a multi-chip module, and I want to bring up an example. This is a multi-chip module. It's a quad AND gate, and it was broken up into its individual parts. So all these individual parts make up the symbol. What I am talking about is an alternate symbol altogether. So let's go back to our op-amp over here. All right. So I did create this here. You know, you have alternate one. I'm going to create the part. Now, yes, I can go through and I can put in all the pins and do what I just did earlier on for the first 5 pins. I'm going to show you another trick. But before I do that, let me jump back to normal 1 so I can show you where you can do this trick. Here I'm going to grab one of the pins. I'm going to right-click on it. I'm going to use a tool called Find Similar Objects. In short, really very, very useful tool. When you select an object, you've got 3 columns. You've got properties, what the properties or the values of the properties are for the thing I selected, and what things I want to compare it against. I'm going to leave it same. I only want to do it for current component. And I'm going to press OK. So all of these got selected. So it's another way of selecting things for global edits. And I've talked about this in other webinars in the past if you want to go into more detail about it. The reason I wanted to select these is because I'm going to bring up another panel called the SCH list panel. And in the SCH list panel, I can see basically all of my parameter information in a database format here. So these are all the pins that I have. But more importantly, what I wanted to show you is that there are 2 features in here. One of them is called Smart Grid Paste, and the other one's called Smart Grid Insert. And both of them are allowed. One of them basically allows you to copy information from a spreadsheet and to put it in here and override existing information. The Smart Grid Insert actually allows me to put new primitives in, or new pin primitives in, or any other primitive I'm trying to make. All right, so that's what I've got over here. And what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to minimize, well, actually I'm going to bring this down for a moment, and I'm going to go back into our alternate mode and demonstrate how this works. Okay, so in alternate mode, I have nothing in here, and that's fine. If I right-click, I still have the Smart Grid Insert. Now let me bring up my Excel sheet. And by the way, the Smart Grid Insert not only works for the Excel sheet, which it's been able to do for many years, they also recently are able to do a table out of a data sheet, assuming that that data sheet actually used a real table. The Texas Instruments that I'm using, the LM741, it was made in 1998. It's obvious they use text boxes. I couldn't show it here, but if you have Acrobat Pro and you've got a real data sheet that allows you to copy the table from it, then you can use this as well. But I'm going to do this in a spreadsheet. So what I've got over here are all these headers, and these headers I can grab. I should have shown this originally. Jump back over here for a minute. Let's go back to mode 1. Let me just grab one pin here. That'll be more than enough. So I got the pin. Let's bring back my list panel. I always find the list panel, by the way, easier to be detached and move around since it has a lot of information. Here are all my pins, but what I can do is I can right-click, and I can do a select all, and I can right-click again, and I can say copy with header. Okay? And when I do that, what I've done is I've not only copied the pin information, more importantly, I copied all of the properties of this pin. Okay? So let's bring this down here for now, and let's go back over to our Excel sheet. And let me bring up a new sheet here for a moment. What I can do is I can paste this in. All right, and so let's just paste this in. It's text. We'll press OK, and there it is. And what I've got now are all the properties that Altium can use to make it very easy for me to create or basically describe new pins that I want. And that's what I did here in sheet 1. Okay, so I actually want to have these 8 pins. I've already given them their XY locations, their orientations. I want them and their designators, and I want them to be visible at this point in time. So what can I do here? Since I've got these headers all set up, and I've got this information, I can do a Control-A for all, Control-C to copy. This now goes to the Microsoft operating copy there. All right, I'm going to minimize this to the copy buffer, I meant to say. So now that I've got this here, let's bring up this guy. All right. Before I do anything more, let's go to alternate 1. All right. And now I'm going to right-click here, and I'm going to do a Smart Grid insert. And I'm going to get this kind of unusual-looking dialog here. But what I see on the top here is what's in the copy buffer, and what's down here are those things that are necessary for a pin primitive. Now, I can take each one of these here, and I can match them up manually, saying paste attribute to the column. And this works especially if you have different naming conventions. However, if you kept the copy with header and you used it, I can hit one button. They all match up. Okay, so what I did here, since I copied this all off, all the information I changed here, Altium matched it up very easily by me pressing this one button. I press OK now. So not only do I have these pins, they're brand new here. Well, obviously, if I've got them here, I now have them over here as well. So an extremely useful way of bringing pins in, especially for large designs. The only thing I need to do now for this is I need to go into Tools, or actually, pardon me, Place. And I'm going to put a rectangle here. And let me change my grid back to a 10 so I can put it there properly. And this will look good. I'll put this on. Now, obviously, there's drawing order. Actually, I missed something there. Let's push this over here just a smidgen. Now we've got it. There is a drawing order that happens in any type of tool. And we have 2 ways of changing this over here. We can either push it to the back, or we can double-click into it, and we can make it transparent. I'm a bigger fan of pushing it to the back because when you do things on printouts, that order of operation can have an impact on the way the printer responds. So what I'm going to do is going to go to Edit. I'm going to go to Move, and I'm going to go to Send to Back, and I'm going to click on our triangle, and boom, now it's done. One of the interesting parts here is that when you do alternate views, if I move this description here and this U number over here as well, when I go back to normal mode 1, it will move it in the exact same location. So just a side note. I'm going to do a Control S to save it. Now, you may say, great, that's awesome. We're done with the graphical part, but there's a problem. And it's something that you've got to be very aware of. Altium is very particular about its alternate views. And if you have a certain number of pins and a certain number of, and their naming of their pins that are different from the different alternate views, especially the pin numbers, it's going to cause big problems. In fact, it was one of the cases I first did many years ago. I started at Altium. It took me 45 minutes because I had no clue what an alternate view was all about. But what happens is, and I'll push this down here, and you see, kind of get a little brief preview of it. I'm going to place this part here, okay? And by the way, if I hit my tab key, just a little side note, if I want to place another one of these, I hit my tab key, I can go to alternate or go back to normal here, and I can actually have 2 different parts with each of these representations on it. But the problem that's going to happen is this. Now, I'm going to get a bunch of errors and warnings when I compile it. But what's going to come up over here, we can find it here, is I'm going to get something that says inferred alternate 1 of part U question mark. And it shows as a warning, but as far as I'm concerned, it's really an error. And it will cause a problem when you try to do an ECO. So in order to fix that, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to make sure that whatever pins you have on the alternate view has to be the same pins that you have on the normal and vice versa. And by the way, you can have more than one alternate view. I'm going to delete these here for now just to get them out of this schematic. But let's go back over here and make some mods. Okay. If I don't need a pin, then I'm going to get rid of it, at least so that if I'm going to make my main and my alternate views work together, I can certainly delete the no connect. It's not going to get rid of a pin here. It's just nothing's going to be able to connect to it. So the rule of thumb is that if you never want something to connect to any one of your pads, then don't put the pin down, okay? Otherwise, Altium's kind of expect to put something that's going to try to associate that pin to that pad. So I've got this at this point in time. I'm going to just delete that out. Now, I also have these two offset nulls, and I would like to put those in. See, this offset null should have also been an input, so let's just let's make a quick fix to that one really quick. Input, got that okay, and there it is. So at least this is now correct the way it's supposed to be. Actually, VIN is also a power. Well, that's fine. Looks like I have a few things here that need to be. There's another one that needs to be fixed real quick. I didn't have it right in the Excel sheet, but I'd like to be somewhat clean about this. There we go. That's out. These are inputs. Those are inputs, and the NC has been deleted. I'm going to take a copy of pin 1, and pin 1 and pin 5 I'm going to put on the other one, the main one. So I'm going to jump from the alternate mode to the normal mode. Now, according to what I have found on websites, what people are doing, there's two different ways to do this. I'm going to do a Control V. I'm going to swing this one around. I have the same, and what I was going to talk about in terms of placement, there's two things I can do. First and foremost, you can place pins on top of each other. So if you always know that the offset null 100% of the time always has to be the same value, then you could put those pins on top. But if you know that at any time the offset null values could be different, then you don't want to do that. But you can certainly do that. If I did a Control-C to copy this and Control-V and I placed it like this, Altium would accept that. Okay, even if the numbers were different, it will allow you to connect, and when it connects to both of those. All right, so just to make mention of that, I am going to delete this one, and then let's go through that pin cleanup here the way we've seen it before. So I have the same problem here with the null offset that I had with pin 6 on V out. I am going to click on this here, and I'm going to double shift click into it so I can make some changes. I am going to copy this. I may as well get the name. I'm going to turn these off like I did the last time. So I didn't get rid of them, just turning them off. Parameters here, I am going to put for the pin name this offset. Okay, and I'm also going to have pin 1 here, and I got to make sure that these get turned on. A little persnickety, you got to start from the bottom up to turn them on, and there they are. And I'm going to now move this one over here, okay, and then I can move these accordingly. So I'll spend a little bit more time on this in just a minute. I'm going to make a second one for this for pin 5. Here's pin 1. I copy this. Actually, one other thing I'll change is I'm going to change the length of it. Now, by the way, I don't have to have this touch. Just by the fact I have the pin will allow me to connect it to the net list. I could draw a blue line here, but another trick we can always do is extend out the pins. So I'll do a shift double click here, and I'll make the length 15. Okay, and if I pull this down, it should work. There we go. I've got that there. And now I'm just going to do a Control-C to copy this. I'll do a Control-V. Since it's on my cursor, I can hit the space bar to rotate it. I'll place this down. I'm going to change my grid to 1 now. There we go. Change it to 1. I'll just move these into place. All right. This here. Move this here. One thing I forgot to do is I forgot to change the name of something here. So let's do a shift double click. Forgot to change the most important thing. This stuff is all cosmetic. Okay, that's fine, but the logical one has to definitely be changed here. So I'll press that as pin 5. And there's my part. Okay. There's my part. I'm all good to go. So this alternate view and the one above are the exact same. They have the exact same pins with the exact same information. Now, last thing we're going to show you over here is we're going to have to put some intelligent information into this because I've got my graphics and that's fine. But again, we want to have a good bill of materials. So if I double click into this, I can start changing this stuff over here. But I would rather see examples. I want to see formats that I've already used before. Well, how can I do that? Well, the way I can do that is I can go into Tools, Parameter Manager. And I turn off all this other stuff. The only thing I need to turn on is parts. And I don't even mind seeing the system parameters, so I'm not going to exclude them. I'm going to press OK. And because I've got these capitalized with brackets information over here, I can definitely tell where my part is in this list, and then I can resort on it, and I've got it down here at the bottom. Well, because I can see everything over here, I can very, very quickly add my information in the format that I want. And what's neat about this is that even if I have to still type something in, I still get a partial enumerated list, okay, a flexible enumerated list. So I need to get part 256 in there. You can see I didn't have to type everything in because I was able to take 255. Same thing over here for this one. I'll click once into it. I'll take the very last one that they've got listed here. Let's try that one more time. Click once, and we'll scroll down, and there's 254. I guess I'm missing one here, so it looks like one got moved out, but that's fine. We'll fix that up a little bit later, but for our purposes, we'll go in here, click once. So I can do an edit here. This will be 256. So obviously, of course, this is where my component link is for my data sheet. So I got to make sure that at least I change my data sheet name to something that's useful. We always recommend that you copy those down from the websites, because when parts go obsolete, people from the manufacturers remove those sheets, and you always want to keep that sheet with you. Who it's been created by, I'll leave this here. In terms of the manufacturer, again, this is really nice because I don't want abbreviations, but if I scroll down, I can get the exact spelling so that I will have it correct every single time. It makes really easy for sorting as well. For this part over here, we are dealing with a PDIP pin, and that PDIP pin, if I can find it here very quickly, is an R-dash, I'm sorry, this is the manufacturer's number. This is TM741, LM741, and then CN, there we go. As for our Celsius, let's push this over here. Again, I've got my list. So you can see I'm not really putting in a whole lot of new information here. I'm trying to use what we've got. This one is 55 to 125C. For my RoHS over here, I'm just going to use the yes. For my reviewed, this is going to be new. This one I didn't type in before, so I'll type in new. But at least I can see the list of values. And then lastly, I need to get my packaging over here, and this is an R PDIP-T8. So you can see I was able to follow the formats to this. I'll accept the changes, execute on the command, I'm done. If I double click into this part here, all my information's been filled out. It's all going to net list very nicely, and it's all going to show in the bill of materials very nicely. Okay, so there is a building of a part in a nutshell. Oh, there's one more thing I forgot, and I'm going to do one more copy effort here. Description and comment. So I'm going to definitely copy the existing description for this operational amplifier for the existing one, and in mine I'm going to paste it in, but I will change out the information. In fact, the description to me is really, really important. As I've mentioned in other webinars, worth repeating. Of all the information that you can provide to your purchaser or to whoever's going to buy these things, the description is the one thing you can read that is specifically going to have, it's the one thing you can read that tells you exactly what that part is. Anything else you probably have to do some cross-reference to. Let's put in LM741, and this is the end version of this component. And the other thing I always mention is that I recommend Control-C. In Altium, the comment and the designator description ought to be the same. The reason I say that is because the comment is the only thing that propagates over to the PCB in terms of parameters. It's the only one Altium will allow. I already know what the footprint is because I can see the footprint, and usually the name of it, the name of the footprint itself is used to represent that footprint. But the comment here tells me what part has been associated with it, and I can press OK. Now we are done with this. All right, I promised you a couple of questions. Let me take a look at the questions. Look at the questions panel here, see if anybody's written any in here, and we'll see if I can answer anything here for you. If you want to throw in a couple of questions, feel free to do so. And let's see. Look at them, and they are coming in right now. So Joe, just one question. If you could elaborate what you mean by the metadata being for the comp lib, maybe I can clarify that. So how is it able to get a grid of 5? How can you set minimum grid of 10? So if you want to do any grid type of setting, there's two places to do it. First and foremost, you can always go into your tools, document options, and there's something called units here, and this allows you to change into different units. I really, really don't recommend on the schematic side of things that you change this. The reason why is because Altium's libraries use DXP defaults, and if you start changing to a different method here, then all your libraries, even if you import them from other people or from other organizations, you're going to have to change those out. Now, if you do want to change out the grid, and I'm not sure how far you could really want to go with this, but just to show you where it's at, under DXP preferences, if we go into our grids over here, there's a number of different grids that you've got here. So you have the visible grid, you have your snap grid, and then you also have an electrical grid. And what they mean by the electrical grid is that if you're within a certain range of the hotspot of the pin, it will pull your cursor to it as long as you're within that 40 mil range, or depending on what your presets are. But I think that the smallest that you can go with some of these is 1 mil. Anything beyond that, Altium's not going to let you do. I'm not a keen fan of making those changes. I just really recommend you leave the defaults here. And again, just hitting the G key allows me to flip between 1, 5, and 10. Okay. Let's see. Let's take a look at a couple other ones. Okay, are there standards for scaling symbols? That's a really great question. And I've seen a lot of debate about this, because what happens quite often is that people will go to a D-size sheet, and when they go to a D-size sheet, they make the parts twice as big, and that was never really an intention of going to a much larger sheet. The idea behind it is that there is, in terms of the size of the symbol, quite honestly, it's not, even the IEEE, and I've looked at the document, I think it's 315, IEEE 315, I'll have to look it up, but if you look at it, it shows all the symbols, but the one thing they make very clear about is that there's no actual sizes to those symbols. So it's really something that you kind of have to come up with on your own as to what those standards are going to be. And obviously, once you've got them established, as you keep copying them, you're going to get the look and feel of them. But it should be something that's readable. Now, Altium does use, by the way, a pin setting. Its default pin setting is a pin length of 20. I think that's way too long, because when they're really long, that means you got a lot of wires that have to swing kind of wide out in order for them to come in. So you can, I think 10, a setting of 10 works just fine. And by the way, as a side note, because we've done cable work in the past, sometimes you need to have a pin length of 0, and it just becomes a dot, and it will work. You can still connect up to it, but it just looks like a dot. So you can certainly do that. Let's see. Is it possible to have a library interaction with SAP or SAP with the library itself? Now you're talking about databases. And at that point, what you're going to have to do with databases, and we've done some videos on this webinars, take a look for design library methodologies, because I kind of talk about it. But directly to this, not really. What you would have to do is, in your SAP, you kind of have to have a database which is going to look very similar to, let's bring up the parameter manager and bring it back up over here. It will look very similar to this, but in a database library, you'll have 4 additional columns. One column is going to be the reference point for the library itself. Where's the library located? And then the second column after that is what's the name of the component in the library. And you do the same thing for the footprint, for its path, for its library, and you also do it for the component itself. So in a database library, each row represents the component, right? Whereas what I'm doing right now is a symbol-centric library where you have a symbol and you attach everything to it. And what you would have to do is this database over here would be in the in the SAP program or any PLM program. And there's ways of connecting Altium through what they call a database library. You connect it to the database. Your database has these links to where these parts are located. And so when you call up when you use your database link tool or your database library tool, it goes to the database, says, aha, I know where your part is, I know the name of your part, and Altium can pull it in at that point. The key thing I guess I want to drive home is that there's no way of actually inserting or embedding the library symbol or the footprint into the database. It's still maintained as a separate file outside the database, regardless of the database system you're using. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so let me take a look here. They're coming fast and furious. Let's see. Here's a good question. Is it possible to create a generic schematic symbol, say for the resistor, link it to many different manufactured part numbers, or is it preferred to have a schematic symbol made for different component part numbers? So Jake, it goes back to database libraries. If you're doing symbol-centric libraries like the one I'm showing you here, then you definitely want to have a unique symbol for each and every single one, because it gets really messy if you're going to try to do multiple representations in a symbol-centric library. However, in a database library, you could have 1,000 different resistors that are represented by 1,000 different companies with 1,000 different part numbers, but they can all refer the exact same symbol, and then bunches of them can refer back to the same footprint. And so that's really the power of the database library. So good question. Let me see if I can find another one here. There's one question about Altium ever putting a method of being able to create a single symbol and reference in multiple parts. It would be nice if they did that. And my recommendation always for any of the stuff that Altium is doing, if there's things that are missing or what I'll call to smooth some rough edges over, definitely get that over to their ideas page. And if it's actually considered a bug, then put it on their bug crunch page. I find that once they've done that, they seem to get a little more traction with it. Obviously, you've got to promote the idea in order to get it. I do agree that they probably need to put something like that out there. All right, let me see if I can find any other ones here that I can answer. So why would one use the vault, or why would one not use the vault? Okay, the vault is, you certainly can use it for libraries. And where the vault has some value is if you're trying to, if you are required, and I definitely emphasize the word required. If you are required to keep version control on all of your parts, then the vault may be worth a looky-see, okay? But to be perfectly honest with you, I think that's really something that's not necessary unless a customer is demanding it or you're an industry that requires that kind of granularity. Because the fact of the matter is that, yes, you may make a mistake in a component that you initially put together. However, later, you're going to fix that problem very quickly. And once you've fixed it, a part generally doesn't change, all right? Because the information that you should have, and by the way, I should drive this point home. Let me click in here. The information I put over here is static information. This information will be true today, tomorrow, and hopefully 10 years from now, right? Maybe the only thing that might have to change is its status. But the symbol itself will not change, and the footprint's not going to change. So the question is that once you've got the part right, does it make any sense for you to constantly have a revision done to the part? Now again, if your industry or your customer is demanding it, then obviously you can do it. But to me, you're levying a lot more work onto everybody when you're making library parts. So that's kind of my concern about the vault. Where I think the vault has some value as a side note is really for documentation. It does a phenomenal job. It's a production version control system. And if you saw last month's webinar, I actually spent a couple of minutes talking about the differences between Subversion and the vault. And I like the way they did set up the documentation aspect of it. So I'll throw that out there for you. Let's see. Any other ones I can get very quickly here? I see a lot of them. I'm going to be very busy this afternoon looking up things here. Can the component properties be loaded from a table? Yes, I believe you can. So the properties here, let's go into Tools Parameter Manager. You can, it's been a while since I played with it, but you can select things over here and you can paste them in. So if you've got something that comes from a spreadsheet, let's say you did a lot of work in a spreadsheet, you want to copy them, you can. I caution you on one thing though. If you click on the top header here, it's going to resort. So make very certain you know where you're, make sure you know which one you're sorting on. Take the information that you want, and then you can write it up in Excel, and you can paste it in as a whole. And by the way, one thing I like about this is you can make whatever mistakes you want. It's only when you hit the Create ECO button and you execute on it are those things going to, take effect. So if you turn it into hash for some reason, you can always bail out. Okay. And I think I have time for one more question, and we'll call it quits here. Can you hyperlink the part number to the distributor's website? I don't think you can hyperlink the part number itself. However, you can certainly provide a hyperlink in general. Let me click into here. So there's two ways to do component link descriptions. The first one is just the name, so it shows up if you right-click on the component as a so that you can get to the data sheet. And then there's two ways to do this. There's a special parameter called component link 1 URL, and you can have multiple ones as well. There could be a component 2 and 3 and so on, so forth. But you can either link it to something on your network or on your local drive, or you can at that point give it a URL link and you can link it to the manufacturer's site. I caution you on that because what happens very often is that manufacturers don't like to keep their information online if it's gone obsolete. And I'm a big fan and proponent of you leaving components in, even if they're obsolete. The status should be changed to obsolete. Maybe you want to mark that part as being obsolete, but it shouldn't be removed because obsolete parts have this really weird tendency to find their way back into the library, and then you're going to revet a part that got kicked out. So it's better to leave the part in and say it's obsolete, and at the same time you should still want to have that data sheet. So that's why I always encourage people to actually create a network drive for that data sheet so that you'll always have it even if it does go obsolete. Folks, I'm past my hour over here. Thank you so much. Feel free to throw some more questions on there. As I promised, I will go and go through these, and I'll type them up accordingly. Some of these are actually some longer questions. I may have to put a little bit of a video on those, an addendum video for it, but you're certainly going to keep me busy for the next 2 days. Thank you very much for joining me here today, and you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you at our next webinar.